As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So a new poll from Reuters Ipsos found that the majority of Americans support the idea of a ceasefire in Gaza, and this is a position that has been rejected by the Biden administration. So about 68% of respondents agreed with the statement that Israel should call for a ceasefire and try to negotiate. So 68%, that's pretty significant. And that includes 3/4 of the Democrats who were polled and about half of the Republicans. So this poll is the second in recent weeks to show that the majority of Americans support a Gaza ceasefire. There was a poll published by Data for Progress on October 20th that found 66% of respondents agreed with the idea of the U.S. calling for a ceasefire and using its leverage to prevent further violence. I kind of thought that poll might have been too good to be true. It said about 80% of Democrats like this idea, but here we have a second poll showing very similar numbers. So this goes to show that how much the Biden administration's support, full-throated support for this war in Gaza, is just not popular. And the Biden administration has called for pauses in the fighting, but they have refused to use the term ceasefire, as it is, the U.S. is very determined to continue supporting Israel's war in Gaza. So my very pessimistic, predictions about their summit yesterday wasn't exactly right. It seems like they did come to some agreements, which is good, but we'll see how this materializes, because sometimes they say that they're going to do things that they don't actually do. So this article is from the South China Morning Post, and this is another thing that's been developing pretty late on Wednesday, so I just ran their article about it. So Beijing and Washington agreed to work together on narcotics control and artificial intelligence and resume military-to-military communication, Beijing said, summing up long-awaited talks on Wednesday between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So this was, the Chinese side is saying this, that they reached these agreements. And in a readout shortly after their 2-hour meeting and a follow-on working lunch held at a secluded estate just south of San Francisco, China called for cooperation and mutual respect, appearing to signal a hoped-for reset after a prolonged downward spiral in relations. But Beijing also underscored that its concerns, especially regarding Taiwan, must be respected. So this readout said, quote, China has interests that must be safeguarded, principles that must be defended, and bottom lines that must be adhered to, end quote. Noted that Taiwan is the most important and sensitive issue in bilateral relations. Xi said that Washington should live up to its pledge and not support Taiwan's independence in concrete actions, and that the U.S. should stop arming the island. Xi punctuated this in talks with Biden by calling on the U.S. to support China's peaceful reunification, according to the readout released by Chinese state broadcaster CCTV. He said what Chinese leaders often say is that China will eventually be reunified and will inevitably be reunified. So there's a few things I want to scroll down a bit. So Biden said some things about, the talking, how important the dialogue is. And this was part of the opening remarks that were publicized. And she said some interesting things, kind of about the U.S.-China relationship, taking a, friendly tone. But he's talking about actions that the U.S. has taken against China, the export controls. China's really not happy about these sanctions that Biden has been imposing. He's really ramped up what was the trade war that started under Trump with the tariffs. And Biden has expanded that into these very stringent export controls targeting China's semiconductor industry. So she said that these steps, quote, have seriously damaged China's legitimate interests, suppressing China's science and technology to curb China's high-quality development and deprive the Chinese people of their right to development, end quote. So one thing that's a big deal about these export controls that I always try to mention is that it's not just the U.S. doing it. They've also convinced the Netherlands and Japan who they export technology needed to make advanced microchips, semiconductors. So the U.S. is also, pressuring other countries to impose these restrictions on China. You put the shoe on the other foot. So another quote here from Xi. He said, quote, the China-U.S. relationship, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, should be perceived and envisioned in a broad context of the accelerating global transformation unseen in a century. Conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides. I'm still of the view that major country competition is not the prevailing trend of current times and cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or the world at large, end quote. So this is an article from Ken Silva at the Libertarian Institute. So in August 2022, the Justice Department announced that the FBI had foiled an Iranian plot to assassinate former National Security Advisor John Bolton in retaliation for the U.S. killing Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani. But the hitman hired to target Bolton was an FBI informant. How lucky was John Bolton? And this was reported on Sunday night by 60 Minutes, which glossed over the fact and treated the Bolton assassination plot as legitimate. So the news report actually did say, lucky for Bolton, the assassin was an FBI informant. And they painted the assassination plot as a legitimate threat. However, DOJ charging papers show that the plot was largely contrived and that Bolton was never in actual danger. Moreover, the DOJ had claimed the man who tried hiring the FBI informant was a member of Iran's IRGC, but charging papers show that investigators never actually confirmed this fact.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
And whatever happened to freedom of speech is the title. And they've been robbing it from us day after day after day. And again, this is nothing new. I mean, this has been going on. I remember you telling me about, and all the people listening, about what that slime ball who should rot in hell, Woodrow Wilson, who gave us World War I to help slaughter more people, and gave us the Federal Reserve and gave us federal income tax and the IRS, and he sent my kids to jail for reading the
So he before he was president was governor of New Jersey for just 18 months, and before that was the president of Princeton University for 10 years, and before that was a professor of constitutional law at Princeton. He arrested, as president of the United States, Princeton students who stood in front of a draft office in Trenton, New Jersey, and read aloud, not Karl Marx, but the Declaration of Independence. And for that, they were arrested because he felt that reading the Declaration of Independence interfered with the war by discouraging people from registering for the draft. Yeah. When challenged by the press, what about the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. He said it only restrains Congress. It doesn't restrain the president.
It doesn't. No, go on. I'm sorry.
Such an answer in a law school exam today would cause you to flunk the exam, but that's what this professor of constitutional law argued once he became president. He knew damn well that only Congress can write the laws. He knew damn well that the First Amendment restrained Congress, the president, and the judiciary. Today, fortunately, it restrains all of the government, but it's just an example of how differently people view the government from the outside in when he was a professor of constitutional law, as opposed to from the inside out when he's the president of the United States. That's just one example of suppression of speech. It's a glaring one. By the way, the name of the federal agent that he sent to, he wasn't there personally to arrest them. The name of the federal agent he sent to arrest them, 24-year-old John Edgar Hoover. You can't make this stuff up, Gerald.
Another slime ball.
Well, that was the beginning of Hoover's ascendancy and the creation of the FBI. Of course, Hoover relished the idea of arresting these waspy, privileged Princeton kids that had the nerve to recite Jefferson outside of a draft office. Now, fast forward to today. A liberal Democrat with whom I agree on nothing, former New Jersey state senator, went to the Philadelphia Eagles football game 2 Sundays ago and had a flag. And on the flag, it had a banner, and on the banner was an American flag and an Israeli flag. It's got his own views about the United States and Israel. An hour later, he was escorted out of that stadium by the police. Now, the stadium is owned by the government. The government cannot prohibit speech on its own property. The government can't prohibit speech anywhere. And yet this stuff just keeps happening over and over again. On college campuses not far from where I live, the pro-Palestinian demonstrators want the police to silence the pro-Israeli demonstrators. The pro-Israeli demonstrators want the pro-Palestinian demonstrators silenced. You and I have very, very strong views on this. We are decidedly on the side of the Palestinian people. But the government has no right suppressing anybody's speech. Congress shall make no law means you can say whatever you want. How can you be happy? How can you pursue happiness if you can't think as you wish and say what you think and offer publicly what you say? That's why I wrote the column. These are perilous times for the freedom of speech.
Let's talk about censorship. Let's go back to the COVID war. If you don't swallow the crap spewing out of the mouth of a clown that plays governor, president, mayor, or whatever, you have no right. You have to swallow their crap and do what you're told, or else you're censored. And if you believe anything else, then you believe in misinformation. I mean, it's right in front of our eyes. We've lost our freedom.
We are losing freedom, no question about it. That nut job, Nikki Haley, who wants to bomb Tehran, last night said that if she becomes president, again, she thinks she can write laws. She'll sign an executive order ordering the social media companies to fork over their algorithms because she wants to know who is writing under anonymous names. Was she out of her mind? The Federalist Papers themselves were written under anonymous names. The First Amendment stands for the right to speak under an anonymous name. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is to keep the government out of the business of speech. What business is it of the President of the United States or anybody in any government what the real name of the speaker is? If you don't like the speech, don't listen to it or challenge it, but don't try to silence it. This lady is running for President of the United States. She's leading the pack after Donald Trump. The billionaires that hate and fear Trump are now going to her. She's a maniac.
I know.
Scott Ritter said the other day, don't vote for Nikki Haley if you expect to see your grandchildren alive. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, she wants to start a war with Iran. She wants a draft. She wants to take young people and have them slaughtered in the deserts of Iran. Is that what the American public wants? Ritter's right.
Judge, we're in a very, very dangerous time right now. And you could see that, as anybody could see what's going on in Gaza with the slaughter of thousands of people, tens of thousands, over 10,000, somewhat 30,000 seriously wounded, over 11,000 dead, mostly women and children.
Oh, Tony Blinken says, well, we'll get them to drop smaller bombs.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
No more being anonymous online. If what we need is everybody, when they log into their phone and they interact digitally, we know exactly who you are. And we're not just talking about the way that the NSA gathers all the information and, you know, the way that big data is collected on you all the time. No, we need this to be a more public record so we don't have to pretend like we got to look through these secret channels and corridors and open up cases and get warrants for all the information that we already had collected on you anyways. No, what we need is that if anyone's going to be on the internet, well, then we know exactly who you are at all times. No more anonymous posting. And on that note, you know, any social media platform, they could sell themselves as the no anonymous post platforms. I believe with Facebook, didn't you have to actually validate yourself? And I guess Facebook, if they wanted to, if it was better for their business, they could force validations. I could even see why some people might prefer a social media environment where people are validated. But leave that to the companies. When suddenly, you know, the government's getting involved, doesn't that just sound like, and we also had that statement from Katie Hochul or whatever it was. It's always for our benefit. There's always, because of the dangers that might exist online, we have to start tracking everyone's behavior on social media because if not, their evil statements might lead to this, which might lead to that, which is why we have to start restricting your freedoms immediately for your own benefit. And we all know what's going on here. They want to know who's dissenting. They want to know who they got to censor. Any one of these people that's not pro free speech is not pro, hey, we got to make sure that everyone's got a voice, everyone can interact, everyone can have their freedom, and they can be tracked even less. Any statement like this that you hear, which is something more about removing your ability to be anonymous on the internet and for government to track you, just know what people are up to. All right, next topic. Oh, dude. You know how sometimes I say on this show that I'm just pulling information out of my ass, but it's unbelievable how accurate the information up my rectum is? I swear, I think my rectum might be manifesting the news at this point because I saw the headline about how the House passes measures to avert a shutdown, how the Democrats and the Republicans came together, all the Republicans that tried to boot McCarthy because he was doing nothing to reduce the budget. Their votes didn't even matter on this one because the Democrats were happy enough to work together with that Republican contingency that's also just willing to overlook debt and pretend like they're making minor adjustments and that Israel and whatever war machine and other people are getting their resources. And usually, well, we pretend like we're going to have a problem with this till the very deadline. And when I saw that instantly these two sides came together, I was like, yeah, because it's Thanksgiving. These people don't want to have to pretend like they're not going home for Thanksgiving. They don't want budget things on their mind. You got to leave that for when it's not pre-vacation. because they're exactly like you and I when we had college papers. They wait for the last second, they wait for the deadline, then they just go, fuck it, we don't have a solution. Sure, just send everybody the money, print more checks, watch some more things, make sure people have their earmarks, and they give up. But when I saw that they were able to get this done within like 10, you're like, oh yeah, because it's Thanksgiving. They don't want these things on their mind. And I was just like, intuitively, I just knew. I was like, yeah, this is clearly a Thanksgiving thing. I wouldn't think that these people would be so open to just report back to us, yes, if there's things that we want to do in our lives, and it doesn't matter how important the task is, such as the country going bankrupt, if it's actually family time and family vacation, we're not going to look into what's bankrupting us. And that was just me. I saw the headline. I was like, this is clearly they want to get home for Thanksgiving, right out of the Wall Street Journal. The bill's passage showed many lawmakers had little appetite for brinkmanship just ahead of their Thanksgiving break, opting for a clean measure that extends funding at current levels but pushes off fights over issues including border security, federal spending levels, and Ukraine funding just ahead of the vote. House Democrats leaders threw their support behind the bill, saying in a statement that it avoided harmful cuts and extreme right-wing policy riders. There you go. They just went, you know what? I'm hungry for some turkey. Fuck it. Everyone game to take the month off and resume not solving these things next month. All hands say yay. As I might have even mentioned on the show. When I look at my coverage of the Ukraine and Russia war, I go, it was obvious that Russia was going to react in this way. You guys repeatedly said that you refused to not move the NATO border all the way up to their doorstep. He was saying that this was a red line. And so you guys went, you provoked the bear. And it's not an endorsement of anything that Putin was doing, but, your continuous need to fight with Putin and your, not wanting to negotiate. I was like, this is all kind of natural outcome. And in a lot of respects, I was even faulting the United States government in that they weren't trying to negotiate, even placate Putin in a way, and that we were sending money over there that was just going to lead to more Ukrainian deaths. Now, you could look at all that, everything that we're saying about the Ukraine situation, and going, yeah, but where's all the yelling and hollering about the Putins and all of the civilian deaths that took place in all those battles? And you want to know something? I don't think I said anything about anything that Putin was doing. We said that it was, not cool. We're not endorsing it. But I don't think we did a lot of coverage over bombed buildings inside of Ukraine or civilian casualties. And I think when we were looking at the civilian casualties, I was going, this is why we shouldn't be involved and this is why we shouldn't be sending funds, because otherwise this could de-escalate. Now, are these directly comparable to the Israel situation? No, not at all. I think what I'm trying to point out, though, is that one of the things that's been a little bit unfair of some of even my own coverage of the Israel stuff, and I've already pointed this out on the show, is that I don't know the numbers on every human catastrophe that happens across the globe, and that doesn't mean that I don't know, this is where you start playing the internet game, where you're like, I don't want to come out as pro-death. You got to start every statement with, I love babies, and I don't think any baby should die, unless you're into abortions, and you don't consider that a baby, in which case I'm on your side too. Hey, listen, I just want to be the nicest of everybody and make sure that I'm making the right placating statements at all time. Just if it wasn't already clear that I wasn't into death, and I'd like everyone to be able to live a nice life with their kids and with happiness and a smile on their face at all times. It's like, you really got to make sure at all part, like, hey, I'm really making sure that I'm making all the proper placations at the beginning of this thing so no one tries to spin this and go, hey, you really love death and want to kill babies. All right.
The right is now pro-censorship when it comes to the Middle Eastern war. We know that the left are pro-censorship because of the last 3 years of COVID and Ukraine censorship. So, does either party believe in free speech anymore? After 9/11, the FBI abused its powers and entrapped Muslims. After Pearl Harbor, President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered the rounding up of Japanese Americans. These are moral stains on our history. Keeping military secrets is one thing. Demanding censorship of even ugly, awful, and offensive speech is another. People are saying revolting things. They must remain free to do so, not just because the First Amendment requires it, but also because talking back to hatred is ultimately the only way to overcome it. And while the suppression of free expression always starts with the least popular speech, it never ends there. Yes, it does seem, just on my experience in the last few years, that certain figures were taken out of the culture, but over time that has escalated to include more people and more ideas, and it's been a kind of expanding remit of ideas and speech and individuals that can be censored and shut down. Have you noticed that yourself? And in a way, even though free speech necessarily means hearing speech you don't agree with, that's an easier sacrifice to make than its alternative, the ongoing implementation of ever-increasing censorship, particularly when you suspect from movements of power elsewhere in the world that there's a desire to centralise authority. I'm talking about legislation for censorship, online safety bills, the bill in Canada, the bill in Ireland, EU's proposals, the introduction of CBDCs that primarily seem to be beneficial because they can be controlled and shut down. I suppose, taken in context with the apparent agenda to increase authoritarianism, this increase in censorship via challenging free speech on the basis of hate speech is a trend that has to be observed. And I suppose it's surprising, isn't it, that that people that had built their career around it, or people that were determined that free speech was everything, suddenly abandoning it. That's curious, isn't it? A month ago, France banned all pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the country. On the same day, Germany banned a pro-Palestinian protest group. In the UK, the Home Secretary instructed police to consider taking unspecified measures against such actions as chanting slogans and waving a Palestinian flag. In the United States, such measures would clearly violate the Constitution. Such state suppression of political speech is anathema to American values. But in the United States too, our commitment to free speech is being tested. Within hours of the attacks, a number of Harvard student groups signed a letter placing blame for all violence in the region on Israel alone. The apartheid regime is the only one to blame, it read. Bill Ackman, a billionaire hedge fund manager, demanded that Harvard release the names of all the student members of those groups so that he could compile a hiring blacklist for his CEO friends. Someone on Twitter compiled such a list himself, called the Terror List. Later, a truck began circling the Harvard campus with digital billboards displaying the names and faces of students alleged to have signed the statement under the title Harvard's Leading Anti-Semites. Websites popped up listing student members' names, pictures, social media profiles, class years, hometowns, and former employers. Republican Senator Josh Hawley said he hoped the Department of Justice was investigating pro-Palestinian student groups like the ones at Harvard. The Harvard students weren't the only ones who faced real-world retaliation for their views. An NYU law school student saw a job offer rescinded for expressing a sentiment similar to the one in the Harvard student group letter. NYU's Student Bar Association voted to remove the student as president. The Philly Voice fired a sports writer for tweeting solidarity with Palestine always. Do you recall at the beginning of the ascent of Jordan Peterson that he said, what's happening on campuses now will spread to the culture and you'll start to see this tendency towards cancellation and enforced speech and prohibition of speech. And it was obviously, you all know how Jordan Peterson is regarded in the culture. Some of you now, because of Jordan Peterson's position on this war, might have changed your perspective on him. But I feel the principle that Jordan Peterson was talking about was essentially free speech and refusing coercive speech. Now we're in a position where we're sort of normalizing cancellation. We're normalizing actions that don't seem to have due process behind them at all. It's just like these people signed this list. I don't know. Wouldn't you be happy to be friends with someone who is pro-Palestine or someone that's pro-Israel? Is that for you a line? I mean, I noticed that this got exacerbated in Trump. It was like a kind of joke thing. Oh, what to do with your relatives that are pro-Trump at Christmas? And already for someone my age, that was an exaggeration and an amplification of the ordinary tensions that were in any family. That any family would have people that were a bit conservative and some that were socialist, unless you were in a very particular community where everyone's a docker or works at a coal mine or something, then you would live in a very sort of insular, tribalised community. But it was accepted that we didn't need to be so opposed to one another that we wanted the government to step in and censor speech on our behalf. Like when you show your kid a movie and it's like, oh, this is meant to be a PG movie or a 12 movie. And you think, well, this movie, I'm thinking particularly of Little Shop of Horrors, shouldn't be a PG movie. It's too crazy. But then I think, well, I am still in charge. I can just stop my kid watching this movie if I want to. We have power at the level of the individual. We have power at the level of the community. I wonder what is lost by empowering the state and other agencies to shut down, in particular, free speech on our behalf, just because in this instance we happen to agree with it. There's certainly been a lot of things said about me lately that I wish had been shut down, let me tell you, but hey, free speech. All of this is legal in the United States. Much of it is protected speech, but it's hard to deny, at least without moving goalposts, that the backlash is as clear an example as one can find of cancel culture. The purpose of exposing and punishing each of them personally is the same as when left-wing activists dox and shame their enemies to make anyone who thinks of voicing even moderate dissent, such as criticising the scale or conduct of Israel's military response, think twice lest they be punished too. Meanwhile, the same publications that have dismissed and denied the reality of government-funded, government-demanded and government-coerced censorship are raising the alarm about widespread censorship of progressive voices on social media platforms. In the face of the horrors that have occurred and those to come, we must not lose our humanity and our principles. It's possible for every one of us to have compassion for innocent people on all sides. It's also possible for every one of us to defend free speech for the views we most abhor. In so doing, we care more, not less, and keep the possibility of peace and security alive, however remote it may be at the moment. I suppose the abandonment of generally accepted principles at a time of crisis can only exacerbate those sets of crises. It's long been obvious to me that principles and values were being weaponized, used to persecute people, to shut down debate, to create conflict. What I suppose we have to look at is how our willingness to put aside our own principles and values when it's convenient to us are likely to affect society as a whole.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
All right, I'm going to try to steel man a position here and see what your response is. So let's say I'm a well-meaning conservative, like not an idiot. I'm not a Mitch McConnell guy. I more or less see the world clearly, but I've got some blind spots. And I approach you, Clint Russell, and I say, you and I have a lot in common, and we definitely feel put upon by the same bad guys. And so where possible, we should try to see where we can work together. And this, let's say this person even says, now I will grant you that my Republican Party is still full of Mitt Romney people. It's still full of fund the Ukrainians people, full of these people who are going to have the wrong position on a lot of things, who are going to have the wrong position even on the most obvious things. We have people who are going to stab you in the back all day long, but we still do have a rising group that nevertheless is a bunch of dissenters from this. We do have some, we have an increasing constituency of people who are starting to see the world more clearly. Now, they're not great on everything. They're going to be China war hawks, just even though they're good on other things. They won't be good on this. But I think some of the party is moving in the right direction. And this is a time when we can't afford to indulge in this vanity project of voting for some ideologically pure libertarian candidate when the future of our kids' souls hangs in the balance. So can't you just drop this vanity project and try and work with the best people we have in the Republican Party to try to salvage something?
Yeah, I honestly, it's a fair argument to make. I don't think it's an unfair one, but the truth is that just as in a free market, without competition, your quality of service declines and the cost of it increases. I mean, that's just what happens. It's monopoly practices. Basically, for the liberty-minded amongst us in America, the GOP has a monopoly on voting for freedom, and they don't deliver freedom. It's a terrible product. So I want to have more competitors that I can actually send my dollars to and receive some of my liberty. This is the primary argument that I have for why it's important that there is more than a GOP option for, peace and freedom. And because the truth is, GOP doesn't deliver that. They deliver record, budget deficits, and they also deliver, as many wars as the Democrats do historically, it seems. So, I think that's well, I do understand the argument. I think that it's flawed because if you don't hold their feet to the fire, they're not going to do a damn thing for you. Let me also say, if it's Gavin Newsom, I, as a California refugee, I am so mortified at that guy having a shot at ruling over this nation that I would probably have to actually get out and campaign for Donald Trump. Gavin Newsom is Satan reincarnate. He is one of the worst human beings on the planet, maybe in human history. He is so dangerous. I have to, every time I get an opportunity to emphasize this to people, because I really think he's got a shot at being the next president. You have to do everything in your power to keep him from being the president of the United States. He is so dangerous. He will ruin this country if it's not already ruined. I'm being totally sincere about this.
It's incredible that he could be such an ego case that he could look at the state of California, the condition of this state, and say, I'm going to run on that.
Oh my God. Today he's actually, so over the past 2 weeks, they cleaned up all of the homeless encampments and all of the syringes and everything else from the streets of San Francisco because Xi Jinping was coming to town.
Yeah.
His actual boss was showing up and he's like, we got to clean these streets out. I mean, and then he's asked about it today and he goes, a lot of people think that we cleaned up these streets because, we have, foreign dignitaries that are coming to, yeah, you're right. He says, you're right. And he continues on. It's just incredible. I mean, these people, they just don't care at all. But the crazy thing is that they don't have to. They don't have to. There was a recall election and he won by 70% during the teeth of lockdowns when all of the businesses had been shut down and our lives were utterly ruined. He walked away with a recall election victory. So don't underestimate that guy. No matter how transparently evil he is, he's got a shot.
Yeah. Anytime any of these people, whether it was Whitmer or anybody else, won re-election, what did that say? That's saying you ruined my life for no good reason, and I approve of that. Or yeah. I'm so incurably stupid that I couldn't be bothered even to look up whether this did any good, and I just trust you because you're the person in charge. I don't know what.
Well, when I look at the polling figures and people are like, Joe Biden is polling at the lowest percentage, for any president at this point in his presidential, term, whatever. And I always look at it and I'm like, 40% of people approve of this
Yes,
guy?
I know this figure is way too high.
it's like it ought to be 2. How are there 40% of people that think that Biden's doing a good job?
Yeah, or 40% of people who say this is exactly what I wanted to happen.
Oh my God, it's so crazy. So yeah, same exact sentiment. I'm trying to decide. Is it Cuomo? Is it Whitmer? Is it Newsom? Who are the worst governors on earth, certainly in America? And then they go, who are the 3 people that were considering replacing Biden? It's Cuomo, Whitmer, Newsom. What is happening?
Yeah.
Why are the worst politicians actually, climbing the ladder when they should be in prison? It's so infuriating. That's the whole argument for, Dave Smith's presidential run that we were all hoping for. It was what those movements create is the next generation of leaders. You don't know it at the time. You don't see it coming. You don't know that the guy who's handing out flyers down at, the ground zero, like Luke Rudkowski, is going to end up, having an audience of hundreds of thousands or millions per month. You just never know. But that's what, lighting that fire in people in their 20s and early 30s can do. It can lead to the next generation of Ron Pauls. So all hope is not lost, folks. Hang in there.
There's been a lot of international excitement going on. The leader of China and the great leader of the United States, they got together and had lunch. They at least considered it. I don't know whether they ever got around to it, but it was to have diplomatic talk and bring the countries together again. They spent a couple days, several millions of dollars getting Biden over there. But it was a 1-minute clip there that made all the news, and that is Biden called Xi the dictator of China, a dictator. And those were fighting words, and that's what they're talking about right now. And I think, well, he probably is. But then I got to thinking, Chris, about the difference. Is there any dictatorship in this country at all? When you think about the control of the FBI with social media and our invasion of our privacy and on and on, I'm not so sure we're in a position where we can be accusing the Chinese of being the only dictators in the world.
And Xi. He said some things that I wish our own politicians would say. He said, quote, "It's unrealistic for one side to remodel the other, and conflict and confrontation has terrible consequences for both sides." He said the world at large is big enough for the two countries to succeed. And he's right. And Xi also said China does not seek spheres of influence and will not fight a Cold War or hot war with anyone. Now, think about that GOP debate. They were all foaming at the mouth, just picking countries to go to war with. And we jump from Ukraine to Israel without pause. We don't even think about anything. We have our Treasury Secretary, who is overseeing a Treasury that is $33 trillion in debt and $1 trillion in interest payments, who says, yeah, we can afford to fight 2 wars. I mean, this is the difference. And the Chinese and the rest of the world are sitting back and watching us bankrupt ourselves voluntarily. And we're sitting here trying to put out the opposite ideas. But when you look at the political atmosphere, they want nothing of it. They want one thing, and that is war. And that will totally finish us financially and economically.
So often, if you take the Chinese bashing, they'll say, well, they did this and this, but they say they have our money and they're buying up stuff and it's China's fault, they're undermining our liberties. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that we've had a reserve currency of the world, we dictate to the world the dollar standard, and it's running out of steam, and we've had that control since 1945, and it's been going on all this time. And so who do you think gave the dollars to China? We did. We buy all their stuff. So we were getting a bargain. We just printed that money, which is a problem coming home to roost. We did that, and we bought up their goods and services. Now communism is still influencing China, and now our system is moving more strongly toward authoritarianism. So in some way you might say there's going to be a collision on who's going to grab up the pieces, because both systems, whether it's avowed communism or the interventionism that we have endorsed and the desire for our empire, they will end. The question is can the people who believe in liberty have enough influence to get people to come in our direction? Because if their minds aren't changed, and I'm not talking about the minds of a couple more congressmen, I'm talking about the minds of the people, and that can happen. We saw a change in attitude during COVID, and fortunately, what we have to concentrate on, and we all must do it, is try to get people to understand there's no free ride. Liberty is something that comes to us, and then you have to work for what you want. Oh, well, we don't know about that. Our country's so wealthy, we can invite everybody in the world to come here because we have wealth forever, all based on a fallacy and illusion of this, deception that all you have to do is print money, and you'll have wealth, and you'll have the military power that you need. That's where the fallacy is. Chris.
Excellent, Dr. Paul. I'll finish up with my closing thoughts. I really don't have to say this. It's very obvious that we live in very dangerous times. When I look at the presidential candidates from both parties, not very encouraging at all. Sadly, even with President Trump, former President Trump, he goes around saying, I'm the only one that could keep us out of World War III. But remember, Woodrow Wilson said the same thing. FDR said the same thing. They're reelected based on making those promises. But unfortunately, even President Trump intervenes overseas, and that's a big problem. Now, do I think he would start World War with China or Russia? No, I don't. But the Middle East? That's who knows? He hasn't shown us that he would make America great again when it comes to the Middle East. So we're in very, very difficult times because there's no one to turn to, at least in the presidential election. But we don't necessarily need that because it starts with the American people. Excuse me. Politicians reflect the attitudes of the American people, like Dr. Paul says. And the American people, unfortunately, either passively or even aggressively are okay with our foreign policy. And that needs to change. And I think more and more people are grasping, because we really just move from one country to the next, and it's nonsense. And our standard of living is dropping precipitously. I had friends that are complaining to me that how much they're paying for milk, to feed. They have kids, and they're paying, just crazy amounts for milk. That all stems from our empire. That's where it comes from. That's what is draining us. And we've said before, we don't get an invoice in the mailbox. We see it at the supermarket. We see it with our prices that double and triple and quadruple. So we're paying for this. And we need to get to the point where we just have to say enough is enough. A strong minority of people, a critical mass of people need to say, that's it, bring the troops home. And the majority of people will follow, because that's human nature. The majority just follows. So it starts with that critical minority. And, hopefully someday we'll see the positive results from good ideas.